I was stationed by the dessert table at my brother's wedding, balancing a silver tray laden with neatly cut slices of wedding cake, when I heard a sudden burst of laughter ripple through the crowd. At first, I assumed it was just a funny story, making the rounds the kind of light-hearted joke you expect at a celebration like this. Without thinking, I smiled and shifted the tray slightly ready to offer another plate to the next guest. But then, through the gentle hum of conversation and the soft strains of the band, Ashley Caldwell's voice pierced the air clear and sharp, rising above the clinking glasses and polite chatter. "She looks like the waitress," she said, her manicured finger extending toward me like she was highlighting an exhibit at an art gallery. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. Then, like a match to dry leaves, laughter erupted from the small circle around her. The kind of laughter that stings because it's not meant to be kind. My brother Ryan Bennett chuckled along his easygoing grin, making it seem like no big deal, like I should be laughing too. And so I did. A brittle, practiced chuckle escaped my lips, automatic rehearsed as if I could shrug it off. But I felt it. The burn crawling up my neck, the familiar heat of humiliation rising fast. My eyes flicked down to my outfit, a plain navy dress, its fabric modest and practical, cinched at the waist with a belt that had seen better days. My shoes, scuffed at the toes, peeked out beneath the hem. My fingers, curling tighter around the tray, trembled just enough for me to notice. Still, I kept moving, one foot in front of the other. I approached each table with a polite nod, laying out slices of cake on pristine white plates, each movement making me feel smaller, less significant, like I was fading into the linen-draped tables and floral centerpieces. Across the sea of guests, my son Caleb was watching me. His young face, usually so bright and open, was tense now. His jaw clenched tight, eyes, narrowed cheeks, flushed a deeper shade of pink. That gentle, kind-hearted boy had shifted in an instant, his expression hardening with something fierce, protective. Before I could register what was happening, before I could so much as breathe his name, I saw him maneuvering through the maze of tables and chairs, his small frame weaving between grown-ups in suits and cocktail dresses, heading straight for the DJ booth. A jolt of panic shot through me. My grip on the tray faltered as I hurried after him, the china plates clinking softly with my uneven steps. "Caleb." I called, not loudly, but urgently, trying to thread my voice through the buzz of the reception without drawing more attention. My heart was pounding, a steady drumbeat of anxiety in my ears. He didn't look back. His focus was unwavering. He reached the DJ's table just as the band's song came to a natural close, the music dipping into a brief hush. And in that fragile pocket of silence, Caleb grabbed the microphone with both hands, lifting it to his mouth. "Actually," he said, his small voice somehow filling the entire tent, steady and unflinching, "she paid for this wedding." The effect was immediate. It was as if someone had slammed an invisible pause button. The laughter snapped off like a string pulled taut and suddenly cut. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Every pair of eyes swiveled toward him, and then to me, as though seeing me, really seeing me for the first time. In that frozen instant, I watched the blood drain from Ashley's face. Her poised, photo-ready smile faltered, sliding off her lips like a mask slipping out of place. She lowered her hand, her fingers twitching, as if unsure what to do without the weight of the joke to hold up. If you had asked me that morning how I felt about the wedding, I would have told you I was proud. Bone-tired, my nerves frayed and stretched thin, but proud nonetheless. My younger brother Ryan was getting married, and I had poured every ounce of myself into making this day happen. It didn't matter that I'd been the one juggling calls with florists, smoothing over late payments, or fixing last-minute emergencies when deposits bounced. It didn't matter that my name wouldn't be mentioned in speeches, that I wouldn't get a shout-out in the thank you cards. I had convinced myself that family didn't keep tally. Love, I believed, meant you showed up without expecting recognition. The night before, I had pulled a double shift at the diner, wiping down tables long after closing. When I got home, I spent hours steaming Ryan's tuxedo, delicately sewing up a tear in one of the bridesmaid dresses. An error in size, because Ashley, in her usual obliviousness, had ordered the wrong fit for one of her friends. By the time I slipped into my dress that morning, my hands were still sore, my fingertips raw. That navy blue A-line, a bargain find from a clearance rack last year, was never supposed to be a showpiece. Just a simple, serviceable dress I could dress up for occasions like this. A quick swipe of mascara hair pinned back neatly, and I told myself it didn't matter if no one noticed me. This was Ryan's day. The reception was a picture-perfect affair. A sprawling white marquee stood tall on the meticulously trimmed lawn of Ashley's family estate. Strings of fairy lights crisscrossed the ceiling, casting a soft, enchanted glow. The jazz band's mellow tunes wrapped around us, giving everything an air of effortless elegance. Waiters dressed crisply in black vests and white shirts glided from guest to guest with trays of champagne flutes that caught the light just so. Every table boasted towering centerpieces, roses, crystals, and delicate sprays of greenery arranged to perfection. It was beautiful, exactly as Ashley had envisioned. Ryan looked sharp, albeit a little nervous. During the photo session, he caught my eye and flashed me a familiar, mischievous wink, the same look he'd given me as a boy when we used to sneak cookies past bedtime. I couldn't help but smile and give him a discreet thumbs up in return. Despite the miles life had put between us, today wasn't a day for old grievances. Beside me, Caleb was tugging at the cuffs of his tiny suit jacket. He wasn't a fan of dressing up, but not once had he complained. He understood how much this day meant for Uncle Ryan, and by extension, how much it had taken for his mom to make it all happen. "You holding up okay, buddy?" I asked, giving his shoulder a gentle squeeze. He nodded silently, but his gaze kept roaming, scanning the sea of unfamiliar faces with a guarded wariness. "Look at all this," I said, gesturing to the lavish surroundings in an attempt to lighten the mood. "Pretty fancy, huh?" Caleb gave a little shrug. "Looks expensive." He murmured the faintest note of disapproval in his voice. I chuckled softly, ruffling his hair. "Not our worry today," I reassured him, though the words tasted more like a wish than a fact. I didn't want him burdened by the same weight I had carried for so long. The afternoon blurred past in a whirl of toasts, clinking glasses, and polite applause. The golden glow of the setting sun painted everything in soft amber hues. I kept to the edges, offering help where needed, and fading into the background whenever the photographers swept through, capturing picture-perfect moments. When the wedding planner, breathless and slightly frazzled, asked if anyone could step in to help serve the cake, apparently one of the catering staff had walked out, I didn't hesitate. I set aside my glass, rolled up my metaphorical sleeves, and got to work. This wasn't about glamour. It was about getting things done. That's always been my role, seeing the gaps no one else noticed and filling them quietly without a fuss. Balancing plates, offering slices with a smile, I moved from table to table, reciting the same polite congratulations. All the while, guests looked past me as though I was part of the decor, a service included with the venue. It wasn't personal, I told myself. They just didn't know me. But when Ashley glided up beside me, her voice slicing through the ambient noise with practiced ease, it hit different. "She looks like the waitress," she announced, laughing, her finger pointing at me with performative delight. Laughter erupted around her once again. Some faces twitched with discomfort, others followed her lead, chuckling dutifully. "Because when the bride makes a joke, that's what you do." And I smiled. Because when you've been raised to believe making a scene is worse than being humiliated, you learn to. But across the room, something was shifting. I saw it in Caleb's face, the bright flush of his cheeks, the tight curl of his fists, the spark of something fierce in his eyes. His gaze flicked from me to the stage, then back again. Something had ignited within Caleb, a spark that was now roaring into a wildfire, fierce and unstoppable. I could see it in the set of his small shoulders, the tightening of his fists, the way his determined little jaw jutted forward with every purposeful step. Before I could raise my hand, before I could even summon his name to my lips, he was already slipping between the clusters of wedding guests, weaving through the maze of linen-draped tables and towering centerpieces, his path cutting straight toward the DJ booth like an arrow loosed from a bow. And in that moment, as the dull roar of conversation filled the grand tent, I knew with a bone-deep certainty that the fabric of this carefully curated evening was about to tear. With trembling fingers, I set down the now empty tray behind the dessert table, its weightless frame feeling suddenly monumental, as if it bore the burden of my silence. I fumbled for a napkin, dabbing my palms more to steady my nerves than to clean them, trying to catch my breath as heat prickled across my cheeks. My entire body felt raw, exposed, as though I had stepped barefoot into a flame, each nerve alight with a helpless, stinging awareness. A joke, I told myself. It was just a joke. I recited the words like a mantra, desperately clinging to the illusion that if I believed them hard enough, they might stop cutting. This wasn't about me. Today was Ryan's day. My humiliation was a small price to pay for peace. But as my gaze swept the room, I caught sight of Caleb moving faster now, threading through the crowd with a singular focus. His small frame was rigid with purpose, his features so achingly familiar mirrors of my own, etched with a fury I had never before seen in him. His deep brown eyes, usually so gentle, burned now with an intensity that frightened me more than the laughter had. I started toward him, my voice catching in my throat as I whispered his name, each syllable laden with a mother's plea. "Caleb, please. Stop." But he didn't falter. He barely glanced back, his expression resolute, unshaken by my silent protests. He kept going straight toward the DJ's table where the microphone lay unattended, gleaming under the soft fairy lights like a blade left unsheathed. The band had just finished a song, their instruments resting in a lull between melodies. The room was alive with the soft clink of champagne glasses, the murmur of conversations, the shuffle of satin and leather shoes on polished floors, just enough noise to let a small boy slip unnoticed toward the epicenter of it all. My heart pounded each beat, a thunderous echo that seemed to vibrate in my bones. I quickened my steps, breath shallow, legs heavy, yet somehow too slow. I had no idea what he intended to do, but I knew my son. Quiet and watchful by nature, Caleb had always been the child who observed before acting. But when he decided something was wrong, when his sense of justice was stirred, he possessed a boldness that could outstrip the bravest of hearts. He had grown up watching me smooth over insults, with a smile, watching me absorb every slight in silence, watching me disappear into the background for the sake of keeping peace. But maybe he had learned a different lesson, that there comes a time when silence is not strength, but surrender. I reached him just as his fingers curled around the cold metal of the microphone. "Caleb, stop," I hissed, my voice low and urgent, an arrow of warning aimed straight at him. He turned his face to me, and in his young, unflinching gaze, there was no trace of fear, only conviction. The kind of conviction I had long since buried beneath years of learned restraint. "They need to know, Mom," he said, his voice a quiet promise. Before I could gather a single word in response, he turned back and raised the microphone to his lips. A sharp electronic squeal rang out, slicing through the ambient noise, commanding immediate attention. Conversations broke off mid-word. Heads turned in waves. The collective buzz of the room collapsed into a dense, breathless silence. And there he stood, my son, my heart dwarfed by his little suit, his hair still rebelliously sticking up at the back, despite my best attempts that morning. He looked impossibly small against the expanse of the grand reception tent, and yet in that moment, I swear, he was the largest presence in the room. My hands trembled at my sides. A war raged within me, an urge to rush forward to snatch him away, to protect him from the stairs, and yet rooted deeper was a swelling tide of pride, of fear, of hope. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice rang out clear and unwavering, slicing through the heavy stillness. "I just want to say something real quick." A few scattered chuckles fluttered through the crowd, polite, expectant. They anticipated a cute anecdote, perhaps a sweet story about Uncle Ryan. From her place at the head table, Ashley Caldwell, resplendent in her shimmering white gown, smiled indulgently, utterly convinced she knew what was coming. But she didn't know Caleb. I watched him draw a breath, his small hands gripping the microphone with more resolve than tremor now. "My mom isn't the waitress," he said, his voice rising, carrying a raw edge that turned heads. A murmur rippled through the room, a wave of discomfort washing over the guests. "And she's not just here to serve you cake." His words hung heavy, each syllable striking with unfiltered honesty. The guests shifted uneasily, glances darting from table to table, some faces furrowing in sudden realization, as if only now seeing me in sharp focus. Caleb swallowed a visible knot in his throat, then delivered the final blow. "Actually, she paid for this wedding." Silence descended like a thunderclap, deafening, absolute. No music, no clinking glasses, only the collective breath of 100 people held in suspension. I stood frozen, every cell in my body ablaze, 1,000 emotions surging all at once: shame, pride, disbelief, fierce maternal love. My knees threatened to buckle. I wanted to scoop him up, to shield him, to vanish into thin air. And yet an equally powerful part of me wanted to scream, to let the world bear witness to this moment of unvarnished truth. At the head table, Ashley's poised mask crumbled. Her hand, poised delicately around a champagne flute, halted, mid-air, fingers trembling. Her mouth parted as if to protest, but no sound emerged. Her flawless complexion drained to an ashen pallor, the fairy lights above casting her in an almost ghostly glow. Ryan turned sharply, his eyes darting between me and Caleb, his expression an open canvas of shocked confusion and something perilously close to guilt. Around them, the guests' eyes ping-ponged from my son to me, their faces a mosaic of embarrassment, discomfort, and unexpectedly admiration. With a grace far beyond his years, Caleb set the microphone gently onto the DJ's table. Then he turned to me, his small face serene, his dark eyes steady, offering no smugness, no theatrics. He hadn't done it for applause. He hadn't done it for drama. He had done it because it was right. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. But then my legs found their strength, and I crossed the space between us, reaching out to take his hand. His fingers curled into mine, small but iron strong. That simple connection anchored me, steadied me. Behind us, the murmurs resumed, low and awkward at first. Chairs scraped against the floor. People cleared their throats, adjusting to the crack that had splintered the polished veneer of the evening. The world had started to spin forward again, but something fundamental had changed. The perfect illusion had been fractured. And there, in that broken space, standing hand in hand with my son, I felt something shift within me as well. A crack in my own carefully constructed armor. A breath of air in lungs long held tight. I was not invisible. Not anymore. The weight of the room settled upon us as whispers flitted from table to table. My name passed from mouth to mouth, some tinged with surprise, others with pity, and a few with something dangerously close to respect. For a heartbeat, I considered running. I imagined gathering Caleb into my arms, slipping out through the tent's side, disappearing before anyone could confront me with apologies or empty words. But when I looked down at him, at his small hand gripping mine with fierce certainty, his shoulders squared, his expression calm, I knew I couldn't. If I fled now, I would teach him a terrible lesson. That speaking truth invites shame, that standing up for what's right should be followed by retreat. And I had done enough retreating for one lifetime. But as I stood there beside Caleb, his small hand wrapped tightly in mine, the truth struck me with a clarity so sharp, it was almost merciful. For years I had equated silence with strength, convincing myself that swallowing hurt was a noble act, that humility meant stepping aside, staying small. But looking at him now, I saw the flaw in that quiet surrender. Silence hadn't shielded me, it hadn't preserved love or kept peace. All it had done was make it easier for people to forget the things I had given up for them. A slow, deliberate breath filled my lungs. I squeezed Caleb's hand, not to reassure him, but to ground myself, to anchor this new, unsettling certainty blossoming in my chest. Something shifted then, not in anger, not in bitterness. It wasn't a grand declaration, but a quiet, irreversible decision. I was done running. Lifting my chin, I straightened my spine, shoulders square beneath the weight of eyes that had once overlooked me. My gaze sought out my brother Ryan across the expanse of the tent. He stood motionless, pale beneath the soft gleam of fairy lights, his mouth a thin, unreadable line, his hands clenching and unclenching, as if trying to grasp something intangible, courage maybe, or the right words to say. I could see the war waging inside him. He wanted to defend me. I recognized the impulse as easily as I recognized my own reflection, but the truth sat like a stone between us. He didn't know how to reach across it without dismantling the fragile facade he had built around this day. Our eyes met, bridging the distance not with words, but with something older, something that pulled me back to sun-drenched afternoons, where a little boy armed with a toy sword and boundless belief had sworn to protect me from backyard monsters. Now it seemed the roles had reversed. Now it was my turn to protect something, my dignity, my son's faith that truth was worth standing for. I stepped forward, matching Caleb's steady pace as he led us half a step ahead toward the center of the tent. The weight of 100 gazes settled over me, a tangible pressure that might have buckled me once. Not now. Not anymore. When we reached the open space, Ryan moved toward us, his face a mosaic of guilt and something dangerously close to shame. His voice, when it came, was low, roughened with emotion. "Sarah..." I didn't know he was going to say anything. I met his gaze, unwavering. Maybe he shouldn't have had to. The words fell between us, soft but immovable. Behind him, Ashley Caldwell lingered like a porcelain statue, her pristine gown gleaming under the lights. She clutched the sides of her dress, fingers white-knuckled, her eyes fixed anywhere but on me. She busied herself with her bouquet, as if adjusting flowers could erase what had been laid bare. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I didn't make a scene. Instead, I reached for the strap of my purse, adjusting it on my shoulder with a composure that seemed to rattle the air itself. Then, in a voice clear enough to brush against every ear within reach, I said, "Congratulations on your marriage. I hope it brings you all the joy you're looking for." There was no venom in my tone, no barbed edge, only a weary grace that carried more weight than any outburst ever could. I saw it land. Heads turned away, eyes dropped. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, as if shamed by the reflection I had quietly held up to them. Turning to Caleb, I asked gently, "Ready to go, buddy?" He nodded, his eyes bright, not with sadness, but with the overwhelming gravity of what had just unfolded. Together we turned toward the exit, our steps measured, our silence profound. As we neared the edge of the tent, Ryan's voice cut through the hum of hushed conversations. "Sarah." I stopped, but didn't turn. "I'm sorry," he said, and this time his voice cracked. "You deserved better." For a fleeting moment, I considered looking back. How many times had I imagined this apology? How many nights had I spun it in my mind, convinced it would somehow heal what had been quietly wounded between us? And yet, standing there, I realized it no longer held the power I had once given it. His words, though genuine, could not define my worth. Not anymore. Without a reply, I pushed aside the heavy tent flap, stepping into the cool embrace of the evening air. Caleb's hand remained nestled in mine, small but steadfast. Above us, the sky had begun to scatter with stars, tiny pricks of light piercing the indigo dusk. The night was fragrant, with the scent of freshly cut grass mingling with a subtle sweetness, the ghost of wedding cake still lingering in the breeze. We walked to the car in companionable silence. Not the brittle hush of shame or anger, but a softer, stronger quiet. Inside me a fire had been kindled, not a blazing inferno, but a steady, unwavering flame that would not be snuffed out again. I knew who I was. I knew what I had done. And more importantly, I knew what I would never accept again. For too long I had shrunk myself to keep peace, to maintain love. But peace, built on silence, is a brittle thing. And love that demands your invisibility is not love at all. Not for me. Not for Caleb. With each step away from the tent, the music grew fainter until it was nothing more than a distant, irrelevant hum. I unlocked the car, watching as Caleb climbed into the back seat. His small shoulders squared his posture, still carrying the weight and the pride of what he had done. I paused at the driver's side door, one hand resting on the handle, breathing in the crisp night air. It would have been so easy to slip into the car, to drive away, to let the darkness swallow up the remnants of this fractured evening. But something inside me hesitated. A lifetime of swallowing pride had taught me to retreat quietly. Tonight, however, felt different. Before doubt could reclaim me, I pivoted back toward the tent. Through the open flaps, I saw the aftermath unfold. Guests milled about, some eager to resume their conversations, others clustering in small groups, their whispers as sharp as needles. And yet among them a few heads turned in my direction. Caught staring, they quickly averted their eyes, feigning distraction. Near the entrance, Ryan stood with his hands buried deep in his pockets, his expression contorted with regret. When he noticed me approaching, he straightened, stepping forward with a hesitant urgency. "I was looking for you," he said, voice hoarse. "I was right here," I replied, my tone even measured. His mouth opened, then closed again, as if the words tangled somewhere between intention and release. He tried once more. "Can we talk?" I cast a glance back at the car where Caleb sat watching us, his forehead gently pressed against the window, his eyes steady, waiting. I gave a single curt nod. Not because I owed Ryan this moment, but because once long ago he had wrapped a blanket around his shoulders and declared himself my protector. For that boy, I would listen. We stepped a few paces away from the entrance, carving out a small pocket of privacy amid the wreckage of the evening. "You didn't have to do all that," Ryan said, his hand rubbing the back of his neck, a nervous habit from childhood. Maybe not I allowed, but I did. He dropped his gaze, his shoes scuffing against the grass. "I should have thanked you. I should have defended you when Ashley said what she did. I just froze. I thought it would be easier to laugh it off. For who, I asked, my voice cutting through the fragile space between us. He winced, his lips pressing into a thin line. For me, I guess. The confession came with a weight, a visible sag of his shoulders, as the realization took root. "I thought keeping quiet was what you wanted," he continued. "You never asked for recognition." I never asked, I said quietly, because I didn't want to make you feel bad. Because it was a gift. But a gift doesn't give you the right to pretend the giver doesn't exist. His nod was slow, each movement deliberate, as though acknowledging a truth that had taken too long to see. Beneath the soft web of light strung across the Caldwell estate, his eyes glistened not with the drama of public shame, but with the private, painful understanding of the cost of his silence. I don't know how to fix it, he admitted. You start, I said, by not letting people laugh at the ones who love you most. You start by not being afraid to tell the truth. For a moment we stood there, two siblings orbiting around old wounds, and unspoken words finally meeting at a place neither of us had dared to tread before. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Over his shoulder I caught sight of Ashley, her posture rigid by the dance floor, encircled by a gaggle of friends who cast furtive glances our way. She fiddled with her bouquet, her mouth a tight line. I felt no compulsion to approach her. Her silence had spoken volumes. Sarah Ryan said again, his voice raw. I believe you, I replied, but now you need to be better. For yourself, for her, for me. He nodded, a slow, deliberate motion that seemed to exact a toll. From his jacket pocket he produced a small velvet bag, its drawstring cinched tight. I was going to give you this after the honeymoon, he said, offering it to me. But maybe it's better now. I hesitated, then took it from his outstretched hand. Nestled within the soft velvet pouch, the silver gleamed faintly beneath the fairy lights, the delicate sapphire at its center, catching and reflecting the glow like a small, steady heartbeat. My birthstone. Modest, unpretentious, not the kind of gift meant to dazzle a crowd, but that wasn't the point. It was a gesture that whispered rather than shouted, I remember you. Thank you, I said, my voice splintering, catching on the edges of emotions too long held back. The words hovered in the air between us, fragile yet firm, the first tremor of vulnerability I had allowed myself all night. We stood there a moment longer, me with my fingers curled around the small token of acknowledgement, him with regret etched into every line of his posture, until the silence gently released us. With a quiet breath, I turned toward the car, not out of retreat, but with the certainty of someone who had finally said all they needed to say. When I opened the car door, Caleb looked up at me, his face illuminated by the soft interior light. His smile was wide and unguarded, the kind of grin that made my chest ache, as though I had just returned victorious from a battle neither of us had dared to name aloud. Ready, buddy? I asked, my voice softer now, not from weariness, but from the calm after the storm. His nod was so enthusiastic it sent his dark hair flopping over his forehead, an echo of the little boy who had not so long ago stood taller than the room, microphone in hand, speaking truth without flinching. Ready. As we pulled away from the Caldwell estate, the glow of the reception lights receding into the dark, a curious lightness settled over me. It wasn't the memory of words spoken or faces turned in shock, but the release of something older, heavier, the weight of all the times I had swallowed my voice, smoothed over the cracks, stood small so others could stand tall. Tonight, because of a boy whose hands were small but whose heart was vast, I had remembered how to stand tall again. And I would not forget. The highway stretched out ahead of us, an inky ribbon unfurling beneath the stars, broken only by the occasional blur of headlights streaking past in the opposite lane. Beside me, the world was quiet, but within a gentle roar of resolve, hummed steady. In the back seat, Caleb had kicked off his shoes, his legs tucked beneath him as he gazed out the window, humming a soft, tuneless melody. I drove with one hand resting lightly on the wheel, the other brushing absent-mindedly against the velvet pouch, nestled in my coat pocket. The cool metal of the necklace, a small grounding weight. I had expected sadness to find me as we left. It had always been the pattern: leave the scene, feel the burn of unsaid words, carry home the invisible bruises. But tonight the car was not heavy with that familiar ache. There was no tightness in my chest, no regret lurking beneath the surface. Only a quiet, steady peace. From the back seat, Caleb's voice broke through the stillness, small and tentative now that the adrenaline had drained away. Did I get you in trouble? I caught his eyes in the rearview mirror, those familiar dark eyes clouded with a flicker of doubt. No, I said, allowing the fullness of truth to wrap around the word. You reminded me who I am. You did exactly what I needed. His smile, when it came, was softer this time, smaller but more profound. He leaned back into his seat, his small body finally releasing the tension it had carried all night. For so long, I had worn my invisibility like armor, believing that if I was helpful enough, quiet enough, agreeable enough, I would somehow earn a rightful place. But belonging purchased with silence is a brittle thing. The moment you ask to be seen as more than useful, it shatters. Watching Caleb stand for me without permission, without hesitation, had cracked something open inside me. It wasn't pride that bloomed there, not the shallow, brittle kind, but dignity. A reclamation of my right to exist without apology. Already the events of the evening, the frozen mask of Ashley's face, the murmured whispers of the guests, the complicated guilt etched on Ryan's features, felt like a chapter already turned. The weight of their small dramas, their inevitable attempts to smooth things over, would not burden me. Some bridges would burn whether I wished them to or not. I had made my peace with that. Some bridges are meant to burn, if only to light the path back to yourself. I reached for the radio, adjusting the volume until the soft hum of music filled the space, threading between the quiet breaths of a boy who had taught me more about courage in one night than I had taught myself in a lifetime. Caleb closed his eyes, his breathing evening out his small body, finally relaxing into the rhythm of the road. As the miles slipped by, I found my thoughts drifting not to the confrontation itself, but to the legacy I wanted to leave for him. For years, I had believed protecting him meant shielding him from conflict, smoothing the world into something softer. But tonight, I understood true protection is teaching him how to enter a room and know deep in his bones that he belongs there, no matter who tries to make him feel otherwise. It's teaching him that kindness does not demand silence, and love should never ask you to disappear. When we finally turned onto our street, the porch light was still burning, casting a gentle glow over the familiar cracks in the steps, the chipped paint on the railing. It wasn't grand, it wasn't polished, but it was ours. Built not with silver spoons and gala receptions, but with early mornings, late nights, and dreams stitched together with more hope than certainty. I parked the car and let the silence settle, watching the rise and fall of Caleb's chest. Gratitude washed over me, warm and steady. Gratitude for this boy who had seen me. Gratitude for the voice I had reclaimed. Gratitude for the quiet, undeniable knowledge that life would look different from here on out. I opened the door and stepped into the night, the air cool and cleansing. Caleb stirred, blinking sleepily as I unbuckled him. "Come on, buddy," I whispered, my voice wrapped in something soft and sacred. "We're home." His hand slipped into mine without hesitation, just as it had on the dance floor, just as it had when he had crossed the tent to that microphone. Together we climbed the steps, and with each one a simple, profound truth settled into my bones. I had spent too long waiting for permission to be seen to matter, to exist fully in my own life. But tonight I understood. I had never needed anyone's permission. I mattered, I always had, I always would. And that was enough. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own strength or of someone who needs to hear this, consider sharing it. Leave a comment with your story. I read every single one. If you'd like more real stories about finding your voice, standing tall, and choosing yourself, hit that subscribe button. Thank you for being here today. Remember, you don't need permission to matter.